Hey all, I'm Teddy,
And I'm Will.
and you're listening to another episode of Don't V LOOKUP, where we shine a light on some of the brightest ecom operators in the space and learn how they use data to make better business decisions. Have you ever wondered what it takes to lead and manage high performing marketing teams? If you have, we have a treat for you today. We have the pleasure to speak to Cherene Aubert, the VP of Digital and E-commerce at ILIA Beauty, a leader in skincare powered makeup. Cherene, we're super excited to dig in with you today. Mind giving our audience some background on yourself to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, you guys. I've spent nearly 15 years of my career in D2C eComm. I got my start at a software design and dev agency and spent a good amount of my career agency side, learning how to operationalize digital teams and meet client demands for businesses that spanned a breadth of categories and revenue sizes. Most recently, I was at a company called Bobby. They grew to nine figures in 2 years. I was there from Series A through C. We acquired a competitor brand and acquired our own manufacturing because we were on such a fast growth trajectory. And I was running ecom for both the Bobby brand and the brand that we acquired. And it was amazing, such an amazing wild ride. And then I joined ILIA recently in the last several months. Amazing brand, has done and seen vast volume, and I'm here to build out their ecom team and drive growth and make ILIA be one of the brands that you don't forget about in 2024.
Thanks again, Shereen, for that background and for you being here. In terms of the brands, actually, you were some interesting brands, Bobby, Ilia now. What are you looking for ingredients wise when you even first evaluate whether you want to work with them, especially having been on the agency side? Like, what are you looking for when you join these teams?
Really good question. And I think about this a lot because I ask myself, like, did I get here because of luck or because I made good decisions? And I think probably
This is like
both.
that Guy Raz's podcast, then. We basically be commandeering the last question.
But I think like having been agency side and not just in one role, but multiple, and like seeing that many businesses, you start to pick out patterns. I was at Common Thread Collective and they're just like geniuses when it comes to forecasting. And we had a data set of hundreds of ecom brands. And I think the superpower I learned there was like how to just look at a brand, understand if it's a winner or not. And so when I was there, I saw Bobby and I was like, what is this little like tiny startup that just launched this year? Like baby formula, I don't know. Amazing mission. But once I actually learned about the business model and the economics, like I think I make some of my career choices the way an investor would make a decision on investing. So I would, look at what's the scale potential? Like how do they acquire customers? What are the margins on the product? I mean, infant formula and beauty are two completely different categories, but they both have things that make them very attractive when it comes to like, can you scale a business profitably over a long time period? And is there, you know, a payout for the investment for the brand itself? So that's how I would determine. And then there's the softer things like who are the people? What's the executive team? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to do something everyone else is trying to do? Or are they trying to do something new and different? Like the thing that you can't buy or replicate, I think is a super secret ingredient.
I love that note on the importance of people and culture. Cherene, I mean, you've stepped into an awesome role at ILIA where I think you get to influence a great deal of what the culture looks like and feels like. Can you just speak to, I think, first your role, who you're overseeing, and yeah, some of the, I think, principles that guide you when you think of building a good, high performing team environment?
Yeah. I oversee our e-commerce and digital business. So that can be as narrow or as broad as I want it to be, in my opinion. So right now, like my core focus is our D2C business and supporting our retail.com business. And when I think of like my role and my position, it's not really like this channel versus that channel, like D2C versus retail. It's how do I think holistically about digital and how digital can support the complete growth of the business. So not only do I oversee, the D2C P&L, I oversee our full funnel media strategy, including our brand media, and including our supporting our retail marketplaces. But my direct team focuses on our D2C business. So we have paid acquisition, we have our site, we have CX, and we have retention.
And where does that fit in terms of your strategy about outsourcing versus insourcing? And how does that change as you evolve, the business itself and the channel complexity? What does that look like today versus maybe tomorrow for you?
Philosophy is really like rooted in financial acumen. So it's like, how can we scale and grow in a way that is most efficient and financially feasible before we decide to in-house? So right now we have a team that's a hybrid of in-house team members, seasoned contractors, and agencies. And basically, like, how can we, as I think about the long-term growth of the business and what it could be, the in-house team can look so much bigger in a few years than it can today. But until we get there, like, where are the gaps and how do we kind of like plug those gaps with resourcing that's external?
Since it is a data, related podcast, and I know you talked about efficiency just now, are there any metrics you're looking at saying, okay, there's a tipping point now where I feel like we should insource this. I feel like there's something we're gonna get a better value out of the insourcing model at this point. Anything that you look at specifically?
Yeah. I mean, cost is a big one, but I think, like, how do you determine how much you should spend on something goes back to like the OKR framework. For me, it's like, how do you determine the opportunity? How do you size an opportunity and how do you put a cost behind it? It's like, well, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Like, what is the financial result and what is the immeasurable brand results? How do we break that out into like measurable objectives and key results and create a roadmap? And kind of just going back into traditional product management philosophy is like, okay, now we have our KPIs, our OKRs, like, let's build a roadmap and let's prioritize that roadmap and let's see what kind of effort is required to achieve these results that we've set out. And then I think you can make better decisions around how to resource them. And then it's like, take that into the P&L. Like, we have a forecast, we have costs, they need to be a certain amount for the year. And how do we break out those costs to help us achieve those goals we've set out to? And then I think from there, it's like, okay, this external resource that we have is driving this value for us, and it's at a lower cost than having an internal resource. And at some point that's going to change, or at some point there's an immeasurable cost of having someone in-house to do the work about the work, which, like, I think some of that is like you can measure it and some of it you just feel it, which is not the data-driven answer, but it's true.
Well, you are your own calculator in the end, kind of in a way. Like, you've seen hundreds of companies, you've seen what looks good, what doesn't look good. And Teddy, I got to take one more question. I apologize, but just one more pushing thread on that. When you're thinking about the budget, is it kind of a zero-based budget where you're making the case for that hire, or let's say the resources, or are you thinking about it in terms of, we know the targets we got to hit, let's say in terms of revenue or in terms of profit, if whatever the objective is, let's work backwards from there. Like, what does interaction look like with you and, let's say, in the finance team, actually even building out that kind of budget and then the resourcing behind that?
I mean, one of my favorite things is to partner with the finance team, because I feel like, especially if you came up in growth marketing, you have to be so tied to finance. So I think it's like, every company does it differently. Every company has different budget owners for like how their P&Ls are structured. Some companies, like the people team, owns the people P&L. And sometimes to finance, it's like, if you can make the bottom line and if the top line and the bottom line look right, they don't really care like where the money is going. And I think that's where you have to be able to make good decisions, but then you also have to be able to partner with any cross-functional like budget owners, like let's say people owns the people budget, then I can say like, look, I have this contractor. I'd rather put that towards your people budget and take it out of the, my agency line item, and like, let's negotiate. And I think the other thing that I found finance teams like is they just like people communicating with them, and they don't like surprises. So the more you can share information, the better.
That makes total sense.
And then I
Uh,
think the other thing I will say about like resourcing, and this is like from the agency background, sometimes people think there's a problem that they need to add a person to solve. And a lot of times it's an operational inefficiency. And like a lot of companies have enough people to do the work. They just don't know how to operate those people and create structure and goals and a way of working for those people to actually be efficient. So I think that's another people cost and efficiency that brands need to look at.
I'll keep on going even on this point where when you're thinking about, that was a really good, interesting piece that you're kind of do the top level, let's say budgeting with finance, but then how do you motivate the people that are actually doing the work, and setting the right targets? So like, what does that look like for you in terms of setting targets for the team? How often are you kind of updating those targets? And then how do you become more efficient? Like you're just saying, with the resources you have today.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to like define the whole timeline of events, it's like, okay, finance has a top-down forecast that they're trying to achieve. Then an eComm operator will have their kind of bottoms up forecast based on D2C metrics on how likely is it to actually achieve that forecast, what are the KPIs that drive that outcome, and what does the spend actually need to be, and how does the advertising spend grow as a proportion of the total budget, and where else do we need to like make negotiations within our own budget to make the growth happen. So like that's the first piece. And you lock your forecast, and in order to have a forecast, it's based on the D2C KPIs. And then for me, it's like, okay, I have my forecast, I have my KPIs. Now my whole job becomes communicating those KPIs, delegating them to the team, and giving them a way to feel self-sufficient in measuring against the execution of those KPIs. But really, everything that everyone is doing goes back to the financial model. It goes back to the P&L. Like there are things that are softer that are in there too, that are like, we want to hit this like customer objective, or we want to have an experience objective, but really everyone is an owner of the P&L. And then like I like to take those, like we talked about, OKRs into roadmap items. Everyone has a name next to a roadmap item. I like for my team to, if they're owning a channel, to have like a channel strategy one pager, because the hardest part of anyone's job is not actually executing in their channel and making their channel work. It's convincing others why they should help them drive their channel forward, and communicating like the goals and what needs to happen. The hardest part of the job is cross-functional collaboration, no matter what you're doing. So I'm like, you have a one pager, it has your strategy, you have your cross-functional partners named as collaborators, and you guys build the strategy together. And that's how you communicate out to everyone else what the strategy is. And then we measure it weekly. I like to bring sprints in, like have the team run in sprints. If I have multiple teams of different disciplines, I like them to operate in the same way. So it's like if you're the data team and you're the acquisition team and you're the retention team, you guys all work on a weekly or biweekly sprint cadence. We're all using Asana. We're all like looking at the metrics every day or every time we meet, and that takes a lot of the work out of like managing people when you can like systematize how they're working.
Cherene, you bring up a really interesting point around grounding folks' business objectives in the P&L. We just spoke to Ben Dutter of Power Digital, who said verbatim, right, that I'm really interested, you bring in someone maybe with a year or two of experience in growth marketing. How do you coach them into like thinking integratively about the P&L with, attribution metrics and platform metrics, right? I feel like it's really easy maybe to grok what's in Google Analytics and in, Meta Ads Manager, right? But like tying that into contribution margin, let's say, feels just like something that, maybe needs to get coached for a younger growth marketer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's so hard with remote work, especially with like people who are earlier in their career, because you used to be able to just be like, come over and look at my desk and like look over my shoulder and like watch me work, or you do it and I'll like point you along. So I kind of like to do that, is I'll set working sessions where I'm like, I'm doing this, you're watching me do it, and we're talking through it. And the next time you're doing it and I'm watching you do it and I'm talking you through it. And the next time you're doing it by yourself and I'm looking in the sheet and I'm commenting, and then like, my philosophy is you work really close together in the beginning, and as you see that someone starts to pick something up, you work less and less close together on those things. But I also think like not just growth marketers, I want like everyone on the team, even people in other teams, to understand the P&L and to understand the metrics, because oftentimes, like if, let's give an example, like the creative team or a brand marketing team, they're not held to the same KPIs, but they like the information. They like having the information, and everyone likes knowing how their work is performing. So I almost feel like it's more important not just training your own team members, but training other team members to understand like the impact that their work is having on the business, because then they get more excited about doing the work. And then it becomes like more of a team effort.
And I mean, you already talked about cross-functional is kind of a challenge, right? From a bottleneck standpoint. My light expired. But that's a bottleneck for one, but also we've heard from other guests, and I know we've all experienced probably even understanding what you're measuring itself. So you have the P&L, that's one thing, but even measuring the metrics in the right way, defining the metrics in the right way, getting on the same page. How important has that been, in your experience in terms of, and how do you go about that in terms of that initial alignment? And are there any tools or anything else that you're using specifically to help you get on the same page? I know you mentioned Asana from an organizational standpoint, but what about like the data, financial aspect, anything else around that?
Yeah, it's tough for measuring brand marketing performance. I mean, this is like everyone, it's just an existential brand company debate. Like, how do you measure it? You can't measure it in the same way. I think some of the things that are shared that people can understand is like, did we achieve the company revenue goals or did we not? Did we achieve the company budgets or did we not? So if you're in a role where you're working cross functionally with teams as partners, it's a lot less. It's a lot more difficult to impact team KPIs. If you're a data owner, it's a lot easier. So, I think number one for brands is there needs to be alignment at the top on what the company level OKRs are. And there should be OKRs that span, teams. So if growing the brand is an objective, there should be measurable key results that could be based in impressions, or they could be based in actual number of certain deliveries. And some of that is like, yeah, we don't know how many press hits we need to land to grow the brand. Like that's so feels so in the clouds. But I think as a data owner, you can partner with cross-functional teams to help them build solutions. So some of the tools that we built at Bobby, and I'm trying to build into ILIA when it becomes the right time, is we had like a few different ways to triangulate these immeasurable things. One of those is post-purchase survey data. Like that's a good way to do it. There's also all of these tools where you can like measure your brand performance. Like there's a tool called ProQuo AI that allows you to measure your brand sentiment against other brands. And then something that we set up at Bobby was called a brand tracker. And we worked with a consultancy who built the brand tracker at Airbnb. And they basically helped us set up this, like every year or twice a year, we would we would do like a market study, and we would ask in markets consumers a set of questions so that we could be able to measure the brand growth over time. There's new tools and solutions coming out all the time, to the point where it's so much that it's like you almost like want to be careful of not having too much information that people just don't know what to do with it. Because another thing we found when we did like a market study and we were sharing it out with teams on some of those less financially driven metrics is someone needed to be the owner of disseminating that data and reminding people that it existed. Like there needed to be, and it was large, it was me and my team that would just be like, okay, this is a great idea. Remember, we did this this market study. These are the results we got out of it. This is like what we're driving towards, and having like something like that you can bring into discussions that allows you to have like measurable benchmarks for teams makes it really helpful. And then there's others like share of what you can measure, share of voice. You can measure some of these like social listening metrics.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like, again, it's all centered around the objective in the end, which is that the objective, you have the measurable results in that scenario. I think it's really interesting. There's different methods to do it effectively, but exactly what you're saying, you at least have to align around something. And then in the end, it's going to show up in the numbers somehow, some way. And if you don't hit the number, then all of a sudden, maybe you have to reevaluate how you're measuring it in the first place, I'd imagine. So pretty consistent with what we see in like really high performing teams even think about. And even just expanding on that point, or one other point is, do you think that the P&L is the right place to look at all times for kind of that performance, or is it immeasurable sometimes, as you said, when you're like doing the brand, let's say Halo itself, which is a very much a who knows when it's actually to come into the fold, when it's going to actually fold into the P&L. Can you still motivate around that? Is it more of like a long-term view? Like, are you looking at like lifetime value as a metric even outside of that, or what are kind of maybe some more like the North Star metrics on like the sub level that you think about as you evaluate performance?
Yeah, I think like the P&L is a good like reality rooting place to look. And then the like kind of in the clouds places to look are like industry, like market share, share of voice, like impression share. That's kind of the way that you would measure like the brand's growth outside of like the financial lens, because it matters. It matters if people are talking about you. It matters, you know, if you're a brand that's doing 9 figures and there's a brand out there that's doing, you know, several 9 figures more, 109 figures more than you, then like what are they doing that you're not? And you need to be watching those that are in front of you. And then for those like sub level KPIs, I think it varies by business and by what the business issues are and what the like hurdles to growth are. So for many, it's new customers, it's CAC, it's LTV to CAC. But I think it you know, like with infant formula, you acquire a customer, and if the baby likes the product, they're with you for 12 months. And it's a high AOV product that increases as the baby gets a little bit older. So your metrics are completely different from a brand that needs to be like first order profitable. But I think there's a core set of D2C KPIs that every business should look at. And it's, you know, new customers, it's existing revenue, like new and existing are kind of like the core. And you can break that out into however many ways. And then contribution margin, of course. How do you motivate people? Um, People are motivated by money, and they're motivated by doing good work. So
I
it's
thought
like,
we're all doing this for fun. I don't know.
I know.
I
I
thought it was
mean,
just charity.
I mean, there's that too. Like, you know, people want to be proud of the work they're doing, but they also want to be motivated financially. So it's like, how do you? This is why every company has a mission and a vision. Is like people are motivated by impacting the world around them. So I think you do have to save room for experiential, like how do you make a customer's life better, how do you do something cool that no one's doing.
Cherene, I wanted to pivot maybe a bit, perhaps for folks who are listening to this and could be prospective hires of your team one day. What do you look for in really just intangibles for hiring someone? So maybe aside from operational experience, and we can touch on that later, but what are sort of your yeah, sort of non-negotiables for hiring someone?
That's a really good question. I think it varies based on the level that you're hiring for, but the thing that I feel I look for at any level is like a hunger and a motivation. And I think there it comes out. Like, I tend to do projects as a part of the interview process. So it's like, I want to actually see how you work before we work together. And you can tell by as someone's project if they're just kind of, doing the bare minimum of what was asked for them in the prompt, or if they were kind of like motivated and excited about the prompt, and like their reaction to getting some kind of exercise or challenge. I also think about just like, it's totally intangible, but is this person going to fit in this culture? And I don't even know how to define that, but you want to bring in some, like, or I tend to look for a person that's going to thrive in the existing environment. And that person may not, the person that may thrive somewhere else may not thrive in this existing environment. So I try and like weigh that in an intangible way, but I look for that.
And I know you talked already about the remote culture environment. You would otherwise go bring someone to the desk. Any kind of like best practice you've seen that works really well, and things maybe something else that hasn't worked well in the remote world. I'm at a WeWork right now because I need to see people, for instance, at least once or twice a week in the remote world. So yeah, what's been your strategy?
I think getting team members together to like brainstorm and strategize really builds like strong team bonds. But the other thing that was unexpected for me is just like phone calling people, like picking up the phone and actually calling them, not on a screen, like impromptu or unscheduled. Just, I think, builds a different level of working relationship and kind of like opens up like a boundary that we have this kind of mentality where we have to schedule every conversation. So I think those unscheduled conversations like really make remote work better.
Good point. Maybe bringing your kids in, who knows?
I know. You can hear them in the background. Sorry, that's another
They're having
benefit.
fun. I don't know. They're having fun. That to me is like that's the good part. I mean, you can have that hybrid life, have a little bit of time, which is nice. Yeah, I mean, I know we've definitely taken up a lot of your time, but one other question that I always like to ask people in the end is, what do you think are kind of like the main barrier it is for people to become data driven? And what would you do or suggest people to do to kind of get to that even first step if they're not there yet?
I think people don't know where to start. Oftentimes, I think even with data driven people, you don't know where to start. It's either you're not familiar with data or you have too much of it. So I think just like anything else, like data needs to be sometimes made easy. I think of like the data maturity curve of an organization. And I think if you're a data driven person and you're trying to help people who aren't super data driven become more data driven, or if you're trying to impact the culture around data, like look up the data maturity curve, find where your organization is on that curve. And I think, one of the things that we did at Bobby was like, one of the hardest jobs is to take all the data and distill it into a few key insights for people to start to get them familiar with it and hungry for more. So if you can like get someone a little taste of what data can unlock, then I think that's like the door's open.
Very well said.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. I love that. We talk so much about tactics and I think activation, but Cherene, you've definitely unlocked a lot about coaching others into leveraging data the right way, and yeah, bringing comfort to it in an organization, which is, I think, a very under respected but essential part of being an operator. So appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
always comfortable.
Well, yeah, thank you for your time, Cherene. If anyone wanted to come find you, I know you're probably very busy, but in case they wanted to look up anything you've said or done, where could they do that?
They can definitely hear my kids in the background, but they can find me on Twitter, Cherene Aubert, or I'm on MentorPath.